Thank you for joining us. This is Health Your Own Way podcast, and I am your host, Mo Atkins. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about how to interview care providers to find the right fit. I'm really interested in this conversation because as we are aging, having that conversation, understanding how to do it is really needed. So I'm really glad to have my guest speaker, Alex. She's a co-founder of Well Connected Twin Cities with a background of psychology and a behavior change expert. So welcome. Before we start, anything else you want to add before we start this conversation, I guess?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation because as we enter this age of empowered well-being, I'm going to be speaking with my experience running Well Connected Twin Cities. That's definitely informed a lot of this conversation, but I've used my background in psychology to practice as a health coach. And so I take a lot of this conversation from that experience of working with people one-to-one and helping them understand what their values are. So I guess I want to provide that framework for as you're listening. That's where I'm actually getting this information from. Yes, we're going to talk a bit about like the psychology. Why is that important? But also, what does that look like in practice? And some of the barriers that we experience as being humans when it comes to interviewing a care provider.
I appreciate you saying that because a lot of people be like, okay, what is she talking about? Where is she coming from? Like just having that framework as well as insight of where your background is and what your experience, it lets people like open, okay, so she knows what she's talking about. She has an idea of where she's coming from. So I appreciate you saying that. I guess the first thing is, I know care providers is self-explanatory, but we have to define it for certain people because, it could differ. It could be care provider could actually be your relative, really, right?
Right. Yes.
Go ahead, Alex. How would you describe care provider?
Yes. I think about, and I love this question too. I think it's good to just get back into the basics and like, okay, what are we talking about? How are we framing this and defining it? Care provider is anybody that you've invited to be a part of your care team, anybody that's providing you support to optimize both your physical health, but also your entire well-being. So one doesn't have to be sick, ill, or going through some sort of ailment to have a care team, because we think about health not only as the absence of dis-ease, but actually how can we be the best version of ourselves? And so when we think about care team, traditionally, when we think about like Western culture, traditionally that care team would be a general practitioner or primary care physician, maybe a specialist, a dentist, an optometrist. That's like a pretty general basic care team. And we're starting to expand that, right? As we consider how do I want to feel and what types of supports get me to feel that way? So in other cultures, right, that could also look like having an Ayurvedic practitioner. We're starting to see more classical homeopaths that are invited into that care team. We also see significantly more naturopaths, right, functional medicine specialists to help us understand not only what's going on, but like what other aspects of our lifestyle are influencing our experience. And so care team, as we think of it traditionally, could be quite small. But now we're kind of maximizing that and saying, okay, my meditation teacher or the teacher that runs my yoga classes, you can think of them as part of your care team because they are supporting you in the access of that well-being. So I just wanted to provide that breadth of like what a care team can look like. And that's really what we're talking about today, is stepping into that empowered place where we are the ones inviting people in to that care team, right? That puts us in the center. And that's really important for health and well-being.
I appreciate you saying that because you're right. Initially, for care providers, the assumption really is, a doctor, maybe a nurse, just a very narrow viewpoint. So when we deal with, like, again, you say naturopath, doctor, or homeopath or stuff like that, the idea of them considered as a care provider is not it's not common thought process at this point, for lack of a better choice of word. And then just to add on, and then that helps with the segue of how to interview those people, because we're opening up our idea of what a care provider is. The question is, why is it important to now interview them and to determine them they're the right fit for you?
Yeah. Well, we have to take a step back and remember how our body works when we consider interviewing a care practitioner and why that's important. And I love, love, love this question, right? So we know our mind and our body are so connected. And when we are in a position or an experience where we don't feel safe, our body has a physical response. And when I say safe, I'm not saying that you are in immediate danger or immediate harm, right? But those, even in conversation, you might engage in with anybody down the street and you realize like, oh, I don't feel quite right about that.
Yes.
There's something about this experience where I wouldn't be willing to share maybe a more vulnerable piece of my history or the part of my personality. It's really important to get to know those like subtleties, because what you're experiencing is just, it's not feeling safe enough to be fully you. And so when we think about the expression of whole health, physical well-being, mental, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, right? All of those things require us to be incredibly vulnerable. And so when we talk about why is it important to interview a care provider? Well, healing happens on so many different planes. If we feel reserved or feel like it's not a safe place to be fully ourselves, to ask the questions that are on our mind, we actually keep ourselves from actively healing, right? It doesn't feel like a safe partnership, and it changes the way we do the work outside of the appointment. So let's say you have a general practitioner or a primary care practitioner that you're not asking the questions because you just feel like, oh, maybe I should know that. Maybe I've asked that before, right? There's that little hesitancy. What happens is we create an association. So when we're working on our health outside of that appointment, we might be more likely to avoid doing things that we should be doing because we don't want to feel that guilt. We don't want to feel that negative experience that we may have had ever so subtly. So that's just one example of how this body-mind connection that happens because we're humans connecting with other humans. That doctor is a human, right? So we want to make sure that that is as safe space as possible, because any negative thought or feeling of guilt that we have is actually a chemical process. It flows through our body. It has an impact on our whole health and whole well-being in that moment, and that can also carry on outside of the appointment. So that's just one of the reasons why we would want to really prioritize making sure you've got a good fit. But of course, there are others, right? You have values. You want to make sure those values are being seen and heard by your practitioner. Can I ask a
Sure.
question? Like, is interviewing a practitioner something that you've ever done?
Not for me, it's not having practitioners doing the research. I do
Oh,
the
sure.
research. I do the research
Yeah.
first. And then it's I've been very fortunate that if it's a specific, like maybe I would say my chiropractor, I've had the
Mhm.
opportunity to watch him before he became my chiropractor. And then I think when you're talking, it makes a good point that even having a conversation before you hire somebody, you just talk to them and see what the flow is, and get an idea if they know what they're talking about. So this is one of the reasons why I enjoy this conversation, because I agree with you 100%. And even when you're talking, I'm just saying I've had people kind of interview me as well as a as a trainer, and I can tell. And I also interview them as well, because even if you're a practitioner, you want to make sure, or whatever you do, you want to make sure that it is the right fit for that person, because you don't want to do damage. If that's something that you enjoy doing, you don't want to do damage to somebody else, and you don't want them, you want to make sure that it's a collaborative approach, right? So when you
Yeah.
mentioned about, when you, after you've left that appointment or whatever you or session, you don't want it to be like, oh God, I hated that session and I don't want to, and then doing that work or whatever they ask you to do, in a sense, is just like negative experience for you. So I
Mhm.
understand. I've never sat down and go, okay, so this interview, but in a sense, you do it every day by researching and making sure they're the right fit for you. Well, you should. Okay, people, this is what she's saying. You should, right?
Yeah, and you can. I think that's the other part of this, is that you can. It's not
Yes.
just about getting a referral and saying, okay, well, now I get to make an appointment with that person. There's another step in there that's totally within your power. And I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about this. Not all practitioners are going to be open to this idea, and that's
Yes.
something to take into consideration. If your practitioner is not open to sitting down and having a conversation before you engage in treatment, is that okay with you? Right? This is all about choices and accepting the consequence of that choice, right? positive and negative things happen, right? If you're asking, hey, let's sit down, I would love to know, first of all, like, how do you stay up to date with current treatment options? What are the things you value in the patient provider relationship? Questions that may surprise your provider. Notice how they respond to that. Are they excited and engaged, leaned into that conversation? Or do you get the sense that they might be brushing that off, really short responses? Those are all things that's all information you can take in, and that can help you make that decision. Because if this is just in an introductory conversation, this approach may come up in a more important conversation, as in deciding maybe there's a newfound diagnosis, or you're deciding how to approach a treatment plan. That feeling may come up again in a time where you're even more vulnerable. So it's just something to consider, right? The openness
100%.
to their conversation. Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with you 100%. Like when you talk, I'm thinking of my own experience when I deal with other clients. I personally want a conversation before I even start anything, because you have to understand them. You have to make sure it's the right fit. But even on the other end, like if I was going to have a conversation with a practitioner, it's never occurred to me that you can actually kind of interview them. This is
Yeah.
why, I'm saying, like, you grew up and that was your doctor. You just listened to the doctor and that was it, right? Everybody
Yeah.
else, you got to refer, you just went in and just trust what they said, right? But
Yeah.
then when you said the comment about how you have in a sense, I'm paraphrasing what you said. You have the right to ask them and have that conversation. And granted, if some don't want to, then this is where you have a choice to find someone that would have that conversation with you or follow their process. And it's at that point, it's just having a choice.
Yes. Yes. Choice. And it really comes down to choice, empowered choice. I don't know how much your listeners would enjoy this, but I love this story because we talk a lot about mind-body connection and but I'm going to share a little. It's a research article that had come up. What was the journal? Journal of Neurophysiology, and the impact of like thinking and how it influences our physiological processes. And so when we think about what situations we engage in, what situations we put ourselves in, and how it influences our physical body. When we think about healing is a complex, beautiful, natural process, but can be very much influenced by the way we think about our own ability to heal. There was a study done on muscle mass. There was 2 groups of people that were there. The study was about building muscle mass, and we had one group of people that did weightlifting to increase muscle mass, and another group of people imagined themselves weightlifting to increase muscle mass. And at the end of 4 weeks of this regimen, the people that imagined themselves growing muscle mass actually became stronger than those that were going through the actual weightlifting regimen.
Did the people that imagined, was there any form of like?
Now, it was an elderly population. This particular study was done on an elderly population. And the takeaway from this was around, because imagining is so accessible, one can do it at any time, but it actually influences our body's physiology. It can change the way our bodies are processing. And so I say this study,
okay,
it's fascinating, right? Now, is that going to win you a weightlifting competition?
yeah, you never know.
Probably not. I'm not saying we can like imagine, but athletes do the same thing, right? Athletes imagine themselves performing really well, and that supports their performance. So I guess I'm using this opportunity to share, like, if we really need to lean into this power, because if we put ourselves in a position where we can maximize the way that we think about our health, remember that we're in the power seat, remember that our bodies are capable of healing, and our providers support that, we can actually amplify our own body's ability to heal, right? Because there's a positive psychology element to that.
No, it's true. Like when I appreciate the example, because it's true. Nobody realizes the power of your mind. There's a lot of people that are suffering out there, and then some people, if you're always in a negative position, I think you can't do something, that can affect your mental state as well as your body function, because it's kind of, in a sense, to me, it's a little toxic. But if you are making an effort to say, okay, I can do this, I can get that, I can overcome certain things, then your body's like, okay, we can do this. And it's just, it propels you to get to where you want to go. With that
Mhm.
said, I know initially we mentioned that you were a co-founder of Well Connected Twin Cities.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why you're passionate about this. Can you tell us, why you felt there's a need for this service, and what is the service specifically then? And how can
Yeah.
someone can reach out to you to learn about the service as well?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, Well Connected Twin Cities arose. It's best answered by a story. So, my co-founder Lily, when her firstborn was just a tiny baby, her firstborn had really severe eczema, like awful. You never want to see a tiny baby with such skin conditions. And her primary care provider said, "Hey, there's really not a whole lot we can do. Here's some steroid cream, and like best of luck. Hopefully, he'll grow out of it." But there was something inside of her that says, I just don't believe that that is like the end. I think there's more here. And that wasn't necessarily something, and no fault to the physician, right? Like they're not always trained
Sure.
in like to support a variety of ways to think about certain skin conditions. So that is one of the things you could interview about, right? But she thought there was something more. And so she, went down the Google rabbit hole. She was looking at different providers, but couldn't find anybody local. Like she ended up traveling 2 hours to see a physician who they finally discovered that this condition actually came from a food allergy, but she was traveling 2 hours to go see this practitioner. And she's like, I can't do this. She ended up having another baby, and this was just so much on our family. And finally, after years of looking for a good fit for her family, they found a practitioner that could support her son and work with the food allergies, healed the eczema, just in her neighborhood,
Oh, nice.
literally 10 minutes away from her home. She just couldn't find that practitioner on the internet. Like Google was sending her to California. Google was sending her across the state. And it was that story that inspired her and I. We came together and we're like, this shouldn't have to happen, right? Just because that practitioner, for whatever reason, didn't show up on the particular search that she had put into Google. That is not fair that she couldn't find. It took 2 years to find the right person. That should not happen. So Well Connected Twin Cities is a discovery platform where anybody can come onto the website and search by ailment, by modality, by industry, and find healing supports like right there in the greater Twin Cities area. So right now we're really geo-specific to the Twin Cities, but our hope is that this model can grow, because what we've done is supported our practitioners and say, hey, your primary job is to heal and you're really great at it. Can we offload some of the discovery, like the SEO? Can we offload some of the need for you to like go out and market to certain audiences that you just haven't reached yet? Can we help? So that's what Well Connected Twin Cities does. We put on discovery events so you can come and meet one of your practitioners before you even step through their door, or even call them up. Like you can experience hearing their point of view on certain topics. You could, some of our more experiential practitioners, like you can come and experience a group healing, meditation, yoga, maybe it's a sound bath. Like we have a lot of different styles of healing and modalities that are represented. But the whole point is that you can feel confident that you can find a good fit. Our providers are open to being interviewed. Our providers are really open to referring to each other in a really collaborative way. And that was really important as we created this directory service. So it's a directory, it's a discovery platform. We do have a podcast, but it's all an effort to make sure that people know what's possible. Because sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask, right? You just know there's something else. You just don't know what that is.
I agree with you. And if someone wants to, like, what's the website address so I can put on my show notes so they can visit?
Wellconnectedtwincities.com. And you can find us on Instagram. We do have our Instagram that's Well Connected Twin Cities. It's very straightforward, but the best way to keep up with what we're doing is really to follow along with our newsletter. So we do put out our blog links are there. Our podcast links are there for those that like to listen. But it's really about just discovering, just very similar to what you're doing, right? Having conversations about what's possible. It all starts there.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because it's nice to know that, unfortunately what happened to your co-owner's situation, but out of
Yeah.
that came an actual purpose to offer services that people, so that others like her may not have to go through the same challenges she had. Now, before I
Right.
let you go, anything coming up new for you and your team or yourself that you want to share before we let you go today?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. Well, it is really exciting that we just had a big update to our directory. So right now, you can actually contact providers right through the directory listing. We're pretty excited about that update because that just means that we've just taken one of the barriers. So you no longer have to click through to their website to contact them. We just made it that much easier. So right now we're in celebration mode. And summer is a time where we can get together as a community, both our practitioner community as well as the greater healing community at large, and just really celebrate what we have in the Twin Cities. So coming up in October, we have our Twin Cities Wellness Week, which we're really excited to be putting on for the first time ever on a really grand scale. So it's really about celebrating what it is to be empowered in our well-being. So thanks for asking, but that's what we're really working on. I would love to leave your audience with a couple of questions that they can ask their own practitioners.
Sure.
Even if you have one and you haven't, maybe interviewing practitioners is a new idea for you and you're like, oh, I kind of want to ask a question. A really easy question that you can ask, and I mentioned it earlier, what do you love most about the patient practitioner relationship? It gets them thinking about what they love most about doing what they do. How do they enjoy learning, what's coming up in the industry, what's coming up in healing? Because then you're hearing how they're, furthering their own skills and developing their own skills. Practitioners are so busy. They're so busy. And a lot of times that's so much client and patient interaction. It's good to know how important it is to your practitioner that they're continuing to sharpen their skills. And a third question you could ask is, how do you develop your referral network? How well connected are you?
Oh, nice.
How comfortable are you referring out, and how do you maintain those relationships? Now, those questions might be surprising to your practitioners, but the answers and just simply having the conversation can really make a big difference and set you apart as a patient between you and your practitioner. So that all works really well in your favor.
I appreciate you saying that because it's nice to have a base. A lot of people, are listening to you and watching you, and you're like, okay, so how do I start? So having those 3 examples to get them started is really good. I appreciate you offering that.
Yeah, of course. We should all have a really simple action step that we can take today, tomorrow, right? To give us one step closer to living the most empowered life.
I appreciate that. I want to say thank you for being part of this platform. I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's not had. People don't have enough of this conversation. Simple.
Right. Or know this conversation is something that you can even do. So thanks for having me and bringing so much focus to this very important topic. Appreciate it.
We're glad to have you join us. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, share with anyone that needs to be empowered and inspired, and don't forget to join us next week for the next episode of Health Your Way podcast. Have a good day, you guys.